Okay, let's dive in. Welcome back. We are stepping back onto that ancient battlefield, Kurukshetra, and really right into the heart of the most profound existential crisis in literature.
It really is. Last time we heard Lord Krishna deliver this staggering truth.
hmm
The self is eternal. It's imperishable. It's fundamentally actionless.
And that the ultimate wisdom is achieving what he calls buddhi, that resolute, equanimous intellect that can see beyond gain and loss, beyond life and death.
Indeed. And it's that initial revelation, that piece of knowledge, Gianna, that the self doesn't do anything, that immediately throws Arjuna into this deep intellectual and moral quandary.
You can almost feel his confusion. If the highest spiritual goal is to be still and know the self, to be not acting, why on earth is he being urged, almost forced by Krishna, to take part in the most savage, bloody, and terrible deed imaginable?
War. It's the ultimate action. So he's thinking, wait a minute, if knowledge is supreme, why act at all?
And that's not just Arjuna's question, is it? It's the question that every single person who is trying to grow spiritually while still living in the world has to face.
Absolutely. So our mission in this deep dive is to get real clarity, both intellectually and spiritually, on this paradox. We're going to be focusing on Chapter 3, which is Karma Yoga, the discipline of action, and we'll bring in some key ideas from Chapter 4 that reinforce it.
And the source material we're drawing from has this incredibly rich, layered commentary that really gets into the inner logic of it all.
It does. And it explains why selfless duty, what's called svadharma, isn't just a social rule or some kind of obligation. It's the essential, practical, and frankly, the highly recommended way to achieve liberation while you're still in this material world.
So Arjuna kicks off chapter 3 with this real moment of frustration. He feels like Krishna's words are, well, they're contradictory, they're maybe even confusing. He just wants a straight answer.
And this is such a beautiful moment, I think, because it shows Arjuna's complete intellectual honesty. He's not just blindly accepting things, he's heard the truth, but he can't square it with the command to fight.
He's demanding consistency.
He is. Let's hear his words directly. Arjuna uvaka jayasi set karmanas temata budir janardana, tatkye karma nigoro, manujayaksi keshava, vemichebe vakina buddhye mohayasiva, metadekavana nishiteyena shereo hamapnuyam.
And the translation is, Arjuna said, if you think that knowledge is superior to action, O Janardana, why then do you urge me to do this savage deed, O Keshava? With an apparently confused utterance, you seem to bewilder my mind. Therefore tell me definitely the one principle by which I may attain the highest good or bliss.
So you see, when he mentions that resolute intellect, or buddhi, from Chapter 2, he's hearing that as the path of Sankhya, pure knowledge, which to his mind must mean you have to renounce all action.
Right, so he hears knowledge is superior, and his brain immediately concludes, okay, so action must be inferior, maybe even an obstacle.
Exactly. He sees this huge contradiction. If the goal is this perfect inner peace, this equanimity, why engage in the most horrific action possible? He's really saying, Lord, just pick a lane. Tell me the one true thing.
The one thing that will grant him what he calls yuryoham apnuyam, the highest good.
And that desire right there, that intense longing for the highest good, is actually what makes him a naga, which means sinless. The commentary makes a beautiful point about this. It says that Arjuna's desire for real, definitive liberation is so powerful, so keen, that it automatically purifies him. It destroys his past sins.
So his argument isn't coming from a place of fear or laziness.
Not at all. It's coming from a place of deep philosophical sincerity. He's arguing for clarity on the path to what's called nishta, or salvation.
Okay, so he's seeking this resolute intellect, what the text in chapter 2 called a firm, singular resolve to attain salvation. What's the main thing that gets in the way of achieving that kind of focus?
Krishna's already pointed it out. The primary obstacle is our attachment to pleasure and rejoliancy, and to prosperity. That single-minded resolve, that focused intellect, it can only really form when the pull of the world starts to fade.
Because a higher desire has been awakened.
Right. A keener desire for something more permanent. You know, if your mind is still scattered, still chasing sensory pleasures, that singularity of purpose just can't take hold. Arjuna is right there, on the edge of it, but he's stuck in this intellectual deadlock.
So Krishna has to settle this apparent contradiction. He needs to establish action not just as a physical necessity, but as a legitimate spiritual path.
And he does so immediately. He clarifies that there isn't just one path up the mountain. There are two. Bhagavad Luksmin Divivida Nidopura Proktamayana Janayojanat Karmayojana Yojana.
The blessed Lord said, O sinless Arjuna, in this world, A twofold path has been enunciated by me before, the path of knowledge for men of renunciation, and the path of action for men of action.
And there it is, the definitive clarification. Nista, that state of equanimity, the stable footing in the self, free from the ups and downs of gain and loss, that is the goal.
And it's not reached by one single route.
There are two. Sankhya, the path of knowledge, which is more about renunciation, and Karma Yoga, the path of action, which is about selfless duty.
So Krishna is saying, look, I didn't give you two contradictory paths. I gave you two valid starting points. And it depends on your own inner constitution.
Exactly. And the commentary really highlights why these paths can only be practiced lok, meaning in a human body. The prerequisite for either path is the ability to discriminate, to tell the difference between what's real, the changeless spirit, and what's unreal, the perishable body, and all of nature.
But wait a second, don't all creatures discriminate? I mean, a bird knows which seeds to eat, an animal knows to avoid a fire. What's this special faculty of discrimination that humans have?
That's a crucial distinction. All creatures have an instinctual discrimination. You're right. It's revealed in their intellect. They know how to preserve their own life, find shelter, reproduce.
Basic survival.
Right. But human beings are uniquely given this power of discrimination that can take them beyond those natural cycles of action and reaction. It can actually free them from the bondage of birth and death.
So it's the difference between instinct and philosophy.
Precisely. The animal discriminates to survive in the world. The human can discriminate to liberate the self from the world. And when that higher, liberating discrimination awakens, when you truly begin to see the spirit as separate from the body, mind, and senses, your affinity for the world naturally starts to fall away. The intellect becomes purified.
And that's the foundation for both paths.
Yes, that core realization that the self is not the doer is required, whether you choose to sit in silent meditation or to engage in action in the world.
Okay, so Krishna has established that action is a valid path, but I can still see Arjuna being tempted by the idea of just stopping, of total renunciation, just sitting down and refusing to fight. Why is that specific path forced in action not just impossible, but actually counterproductive?
The Lord completely destroys that notion. He states a universal, non-negotiable law of the material world. It's a fundamental principle.
For no one can remain even for a moment without performing action. Everyone is made to act helplessly by the impulses born of nature.
That is a categorical statement. It applies to everyone. It doesn't matter what your spiritual discipline is. Action, knowledge, devotion, it doesn't matter. The body, the mind, the senses, they're in constant motion. So being a karmic, being completely actionless, is an impossibility.
And we tend to think of action as just, physical work.
Right, but that's only the grossest level. We also have to account for the subtle body.
Okay, so what are the actions of the subtle body?
Things like thinking, remembering, dreaming. Even sleeping is counted as an action. And the commentary goes even further. It says that even in the deepest spiritual trance, a state of absorption performed by what's called the causal body, that is still considered an action.
Why?
Because the underlying mechanism, prakriti, or nature, is ceaselessly, relentlessly active.
This is where it gets really interesting for me. You describe prakriti as this ever-active kaleidoscopic force. How does the activity of nature end up binding the self, which we've just established is detached and a non-doer?
That's the heart of the illusion. Prakriti is the constant flux of material existence, with its three modes, sattva, rajas, and tamas. It never stops. Our body, our senses, our mind, our intellect, they are all, in a sense, fragments or evolutes of this nature.
And the self?
The self, pure consciousness, is inherently the non-doer. It's uniform, it's imperishable, it's detached. But the moment the self assumes an affinity for the body, the moment it identifies with all this movement,
It makes a mistake.
it makes a mistake. It says, I am the doer. It's this egoistic notion, this attachment that binds the soul and makes it feel helpless, tossed around by nature's constant impulses.
So if the body and mind are always going to be active because they're part of nature, and we can't just stop being in a body, how does anyone ever achieve true actionlessness? Is it just some abstract philosophical idea?
The only way out of this helplessness is through a radical renunciation. But not of the action. You have to renounce the affinity.
The sense of ownership.
Yes. You have to realize that all these activities, seeing, hearing, thinking, breathing, they belong to the world, to prakriti, not to the self. A karma yogi, a practitioner of selfless action, specifically targets this helplessness by renouncing the desire for and the attachment to the results of these actions.
You can't stop the car from moving, but you have to stop claiming you're the one driving it.
That's a good way to put it. You must stop claiming the movement is mine or for me.
And if that's true, if the body is just compelled by nature, then trying to force the mind to stop thinking, that must be the ultimate exercise in futility. This seems to be Krishna's very sharp warning against performative inaction.
Precisely. And he doesn't just call it a mistake. He uses a very strong and very necessary word here. He warns about hypocrisy. He calls this person a mithyakara. This is a critical concept for anyone on a spiritual path. Karmendriya sayamya saltmanasa smoran indriyartan vimudatma mitikara sa usyat.
And the translation is incredibly stark. He who, restraining the organs of action, sits thinking of the sense objects in mind, he of deluded understanding is said to be a hypocrite.
So the hypocrite, the mithyaka, is defined by having only outward restraint, samyamya. They've got physical control of their hands, their feet, their speech. They might even have outward control of their eyes and ears. To the outside world, they look like a perfect renunciate.
So he's gone into the cave, he's sitting cross-legged, maybe he's doing some breathing exercises, but inside, the mind is just running wild.
It's just scrolling through a mental catalog of all the things he's given up. He's running a movie reel of desire in his head.
That's a perfect modern analogy for it.
And he's called Vimatatna deluded, because he actually convinces himself that he's actionless just because of this outward show. But this is dangerous for a few reasons. First, the internal enjoyment continues, which means the attachment, the very thing that binds him, is actually being strengthened, not broken.
And second,
he develops false pride. The ego swells up, thinking, look at me, look how disciplined and spiritual I am. This outward show, when the inner affinity is still there, is worse than useless. It's actively binding.
I have to ask, though, even if he's doing it for spiritual reasons, isn't that still better than someone who's just out in the world actively and physically chasing pleasure? Is the mental pursuit really worse than the physical one?
The commentary suggests it's potentially more dangerous. And the reason is the deceit and the egoism it creates. You see, the person who is openly attached and seeking things in the world, at least they know they're bound. They're honest about their condition.
Whereas the hypocrite is lying to himself and to everyone else.
Exactly. He believes he's pure and actionless. He might even get the praise of society for it, all while internally feeding the very root of bondage, which is unrestrained desire. True renunciation, as Krishna is making crystal clear, is never about just stopping the body. It's about renouncing the desire and attachment behind the action.
Okay, so forced inaction leads to hypocrisy. The only sane spiritual solution then is to act, but to act in the right way. And this is where Krishna defines the true mark of a successful spiritual seeker, setting him apart from that mithyakar.
He gives the formula for real freedom. This is the foundation of karma yoga. Yastu vindya shimana sanyamyaravyate chuna karmandiya karma yogam asakta savishyate.
But he who, controlling the senses by the mind, O Arjuna, and engaging the organs of action in karma yoga performs action without attachment, he excels.
Now notice the key difference from the hypocrite. This person controls the senses by the mind. This is a much deeper level of control.
How is that achieved?
It's achieved by applying that special human faculty of discrimination we talked about. By using the mind to constantly realize that the true self has no affinity for the senses or the body. When you really deeply realize that, the control becomes total because the attachment has been cut at the root.
And once that attachment is gone, the body and senses can be engaged in any activity, even a war, without the soul being bound. But what makes the action karma yoga specifically?
Karma yoga is defined as performing actions solely for the welfare of others, for the good of the world, with absolutely no selfish motive. This is the state of being asakta, unattached. Krishna is clarifying that the action itself isn't the problem. It's the attachment to the action that's terrible and binding.
So actions done for others naturally weaken that attachment.
They do. They make it much easier to renounce attachment.
This brings me back to that fork in the road from the beginning. Karma yoga versus jnana yoga. If they both lead to the same goal, to nishtha, why does Krishna seem to be recommending action so strongly for Arjuna? I mean, Arjuna seems like a pretty intellectual guy, ready for knowledge. Is one path actually easier for most of us?
The commentary makes a really powerful argument for the, let's say, the relative accessibility of karma yoga. For a Jnana yogi, someone on the path of pure knowledge, to get rid of egoism and attachment requires this immense upfront dispassion. You have to almost immediately and completely remove your identification with the body.
Which sounds extraordinarily difficult to maintain, especially at the beginning.
It is a tiny lapse in concentration, and that ego can come flooding right back in.
So how does Karma Yoga offer a different approach?
Karma Yoga gives you a practical, continuous way to dissolve the ego. Just by the simple act of doing your duty for others without wanting anything back, without craving the results, your attachment naturally begins to dissolve. It can often happen more quickly, even without that intense initial dispassion that the path of knowledge requires.
It's like a stepping stone.
It's the perfect stepping stone. Once attachment is worn away through selfless action, you achieve that state of equanimity. And from there, you're perfectly positioned to use the path of knowledge to reach ultimate perfection. For most people, action is the necessary training ground for true knowledge. And to really drive home the necessity of action, Krishna now shifts the focus. He moves from personal liberation to the cosmic order. Action isn't just a personal choice for your own salvation. It's the very engine that keeps the universe running. It was ordained by the Creator.
He introduces this divine mechanism, the concept of yanja, the wheel of sacrifice.
Sahayabad, Praja Purovaka Prajapatiyo Anina Prasaviant ab Efongs Kviat Kamaduk, Devan Pavayatana te Deva Balantu, Paparaspara Bhavayanta Shea Param Abapsyata.
At the beginning of creation, the Creator created mankind, attended with sacrifice, and said, "By this shall ye propagate. Let this provide you all the necessary requisites for sacrifice. By this foster you the gods, and let the gods foster you. Thus fostering each other, you shall attain to the supreme good."
It really sounds like a divine contract, doesn't it? A kind of symbiotic relationship set up by Prajapati, who is Brahma, the creator.
It does. So what is the working definition of yajna or sacrifice here? Especially for someone practicing karma yoga. It's not just about fire rituals, is it?
No, not at all. While yaja can mean ritual oblation in the broad context of the Gita and the path of action, it means the performance of all prescribed duties. Whatever your duties are, according to your station in life, the time, the circumstances, doing them without any selfish motive, that is yaja.
So Brahma ordained this cosmic cycle of giving and receiving to keep everything in balance.
Exactly. For the preservation and ultimately the salvation of creation, this is the core social principle.
And what is that principle?
The commentary stresses that it's the idea that every single person should perform their duty in order to safeguard the rights of others.
That's a huge shift in perspective.
It is. The text implies that the root of all social conflict, all the friction and decay we see in society, comes from people demanding their rights without being willing to perform their duties.
But the karma yogi, who is always ready to serve.
The karma yogi finds that according to this divine ordinance, everything they need to perform their service, the materials, the energy, the sustenance for their body, is automatically provided. They live in a state of effortless harmony with the cosmic order.
And on the flip side, breaking this cycle, taking from the system without giving back, is condemned in the strongest possible terms.
Itambogan hivo devadasyante yanyabhavita tatanapadaevyo yobuktene vasaya jishanto muchante sarvakilbiaim banchatate agapapa ye pakante atmakarant.
Fostered by sacrifice, the gods will give you all the necessary ingredients. He who enjoys these objects without utilizing them in the service of others is verily a thief. The righteous who eat the remnants of the sacrifice are released from all sins, but those sinful ones who cook food for their own sake verily eat sin.
That phrase, stena eva sa, verily a thief, is just astonishingly powerful. It completely reframes morality in cosmic, economic, and even ecological terms.
So what is this universal debt we all have that makes us thieves if we ignore it?
The idea is that we are indebted to all beings. The texts list them. The gods, the sages, our parents, all creatures, for everything that sustains us. The food we eat, the knowledge we gain, the materials we use, the very air we breathe. To use all of these resources purely for our own enjoyment without giving back to the universal order is the act of a thief.
So the theft isn't just about taking something physical, it's a spiritual and ethical crime.
Absolutely. And a commentary expands the definition of a thief to include anyone who performs actions with a selfish motive.
Even if the actions look good on the outside.
Yes. Even if you're doing charity or performing religious rituals, if you're doing it to get honor, to get praise, to build up your reputation, then you verily eat sin. You are cooking the food of life purely for your own sake, Atmakarnat. And you can't have peace of mind if your motive is rooted in personal gain.
And what about the other side of that? What does it mean in practice to eat the remnants of the sacrifice and be freed from sin?
It means using everything the world gives you in service to the world. When you use a resource, your time, your energy, your money, for others, you are simultaneously renouncing your own personal affinity for that resource.
And that act of renouncing the affinity is like repaying the debt.
That's it exactly. The state of detachment that remains, the inner peace you achieve through that selfless action, that is the remnant of the sacrifice. And that remnant leads directly to liberation.
To really hammer this home, Krishna then traces the entire chain of existence, linking this mandatory action directly to God.
Anad pavanti bhutani pajanasya sambhavayajat tavate pajani janankavat pamatava kama brahmatava vidi brahma pamakasmava tasmat sarvagata brahmitya yanya prathitam.
From food, creatures come into being. From rain, food is produced. From sacrifice arises rain, and sacrifice is born of action. Know thou that action has its origin in Brahma, the Veda, and Brahma springs from the imperishable. Therefore, the all-pervading infinite ever rests in sacrifice.
Let's trace that chain. You have the physical cycle. Food sustains us, rain creates the food, and sacrifice, or duty, brings the rain. Then it moves to the spiritual causality.
Sacrifice is born of action. Where does it go from there?
Action, or karma, has its origin in Brahma. Now here, Brahma means the Veda, the eternal divine knowledge that tells us what our duty is. The Veda, in turn, springs from the Akara, the imperishable, absolute God. Therefore, God is the ultimate root of everything.
Okay, but if God is all-pervading, why does the verse specifically say that God specially rests in yaja, in sacrifice? I mean, isn't God everywhere already?
That's the crucial theological point. Yes, God is absolutely omnipresent, but our ability to realize that presence is blocked. It's obstructed by our selfishness and our attachment,
So our ego acts like a veil.
a very thick veil.
Hmm.
Performing actions for yourself and the attachment to the body that comes from that is the biggest obstacle to God realization. So when you perform your duty, your yanja, selflessly for the welfare of others, you are systematically destroying that obstacle. And therefore, selfless duty becomes the purest place, the easiest way to access and realize the God who is already there.
Okay, so we've established that for the unliberated soul, action is mandatory. It's how you avoid hypocrisy and repay this cosmic debt. But what about the fully liberated soul? The one who has already realized that pure, non-acting self, are they still bound by this universal law of duty?
It's a logical next question, and Krishna addresses it directly. He describes the state of the ultimate yogi, the one who has reached perfection and is completely content within the self. Yes, Tiavyatmaratiri vesyatatmatatkaskamanavadabmani evasatostasikarya vidyate naivatashakatanarto naktanakashkananakasya sarvavutin arthavyapashraya.
But for that man who rejoices only in the self, who is satisfied with the self, and who is content in the self alone, verily there exists no work that needs to be done. For him there is no interest whatsoever in performance of an action or its non-performance, nor does he depend on any creature for any interest of his.
This is the state of perfection. The self is real, it's changeless, it's infinite. And because the self is the source of its own intrinsic delight Maradi, there is no sense of lack. There is no shortage within that consciousness.
And without a sense of lack, there can be no desire.
Exactly. Worldly objects can only give you a fleeting satisfaction, but true contentment, satuas, is found only within the self. So if you've realized that self, there's nothing left to do, nothing left to know, nothing left to acquire, work, duty, effort, all of that only exists for those who are still holding on to that illusory affinity with the world, that feeling of I and mine.
But if that's true, if the self-satisfied yogi has no duty, then why do we see great saints, and for that matter, Krishna himself, continuing to act in the world? It seems to contradict what was just said.
And this is where the teaching gets even more profound. It's the necessity of divine action, what's called lokasaloka, holding the world together. Krishna uses himself as the ultimate example of unattached action. Namaparthasti kartavya trio lokyokinyakana, varta eva karmanch, yadi hahana varteya, jatu karman yatandrita, utsiddhir imelokana kurya karmachataham.
There is nothing in the three worlds, O Arjuna, that should be done by me, nor is there anything unattained that should be attained. Yet I engage myself in action, for if I did not engage myself in action unwearied, men would in every way follow my path, O Arjuna. If I did not perform action, these worlds would perish, and I should be the creator of confusion of castes and destruction of these people.
So here is the Lord, who is perfectly satisfied, stating that he still acts. And notice how he acts. enthusiastically, promptly, and carefully. He's not just going through the motions, he does it purely for the welfare and cohesion of the world.
He acts not because he has to, but as a kind of moral imperative for the rest of us.
Yes. And why is that example so critical? He says the world would perish if he stopped. Why?
I assume because people follow the leader.
Precisely. Ordinary people follow the path set by great figures, the Lord, the enlightened saints. If these models of perfection were to just stop acting entirely, the world would follow them into indolence and heedlessness.
And people would renounce the action, but
They'd keep their deep-seated attachments. And that combination would lead to the destruction of righteousness, of dharma, and create massive social confusion, which is called sakara. It's why actions must be performed carefully and promptly. Any trace of indifference or carelessness actually maintains our affinity for action, which is the thing that binds us.
that idea that the divine needs to act so that we don't fall into ruin is a staggering thought. It turns action into a form of grace.
It does. And this role of the enlightened soul as a model for the world, this lokasagraha, is then applied to the Vidhan, the wise person who is established in the self. This is perhaps the most practical piece of advice for any teacher or leader. Sakto karmaya vidaya, the jani kurvanti farata kuryat vidau, tata sakta chikirur lokasarham, na budivdada janayit ayana, karma sayunam, joyat sarvakarmani vidvan yukta samakaran. As the ignorant men act from attachment to action, O Varata, so should the wise act without attachment, wishing the welfare of the world. Let no wise man established in the self unsettle the minds of ignorant people who are attached to action. He should set others to act, himself performing his duties with devotion. So the Vidvan, the wise person, acts without any ego or selfish motive, maintaining perfect spiritual balance, yukta. The ignorant, the abhidvasa, are not bad people. They're people who have faith in virtuous, scripture-approved actions, but they're still attached to the results.
They're doing good things, but for selfish reasons.
For praise, for pleasure, for security. So the wise person must imitate the careful, scrupulous way the ignorant person performs their duty, but do it with complete inner detachment, setting an example of pure, selfless service.
But that key instruction, na buddhi bada janiyet, do not unsettle their minds, that's profound. If the wise person knows that knowledge is ultimately superior to action, why shouldn't they just preach that? Why not tell everyone to stop acting and just meditate?
Because it would be disastrous. It would undermine the very mechanism that is leading those people toward liberation. If you tell an attached person, action is bondage, knowledge is everything, what will they do? They'll renounce the action. They'll stop going to work, stop supporting their family, stop doing their duties.
But they'll still be attached, still full of desire.
Exactly. So now they're idle, but they're internally consumed by desire and probably by pride for their renunciation. It leads directly to their downfall. They've given up the purifying agent while keeping the binding agent.
That makes perfect sense.
The correct approach for the wise is to admire the person's virtuous actions, but gently persuade them to renounce the desire for the fruit of the action, not the action itself. The text says the desire for worldly fruit is meager, like trading a precious jewel for a handful of pebbles. If you can just persuade people to act without desire, that selfless action becomes their path to bliss. The wise person just has to set the example.
Okay, let's circle back to the core mechanism of how action works. We're returning to this idea of prakriti. If both the liberated and the unliberated are active, and the soul itself is not the doer, then who or what is actually doing anything? We need to really understand the mechanics of this delusion.
Krishna explains exactly how the ego captures the mind. Prakikriyamadi gachai karmech karvasha akaravimbushat makartama iti manyat.
All actions are performed in all cases by the modes of nature. He whose mind is deluded by egoism thinks, I am the doer.
So the body, the senses, the mind, the intellect, they are all products of the three modes, the gudas, of nature. All activity, breathing, thinking, moving, it all just flows through them. The soul is merely the illuminator, the changeless observer in the background.
But through a hakara, egoism, that feeling of I-ness,
Soul gets confused. It mistakenly identifies itself with the machinery and assumes the title, Kartahem, I am the doer.
it sounds like a kind of philosophical self-hypnosis. Why is the soul so easily tricked into claiming credit for actions that belong to nature?
It's an affinity born of, well, beginningless ignorance. It's a habit. The wise seeker is urged to constantly remember the reality of the two separate spheres, the changeless soul and the constantly moving modes of nature. By seeing that strict separation, the soul realizes it's never been connected to the action.
And the practical goal is to stop assuming doership.
Exactly. Now let's connect this directly back to Arjuna's crisis, fighting a war. This is the most violent kind of action, and yet Krishna insists it is the best path for him. This leads to the definitive statement on the hierarchy of duties. It's the famous verse on Svadharma versus Paradharma. Shriyan Svadharmo Viguta Paradharma Svanuhitat Svadharma Nithana Shriya Paradharmo Bhayava.
Better is one's own duty, though devoid of merit, than the duty of another well discharged. Better is death in one's own duty. The duty of another is fraught with fear.
Now, this is so often misinterpreted as just a rigid rule about social class, but the commentary reveals a much deeper philosophical distinction. Svadharma, one's own duty based on your inner nature and station, is described as sentient.
What does that mean, a sentient duty?
It means it's intrinsically connected to the self. It's aimed at God realization. Things like detachment, self-control, service, these are part of that sentient duty. So for Arjuna, the act of fighting, even though it looks violent and maybe vigoa faulty or devoid of merit, is his svadharma.
Because performing it without attachment is the specific path designed to lead him to salvation. It's ordained by his warrior nature.
Precisely. His duty is designed to help him achieve detachment. By contrast, paradharma, the duty of another, is described as insentient. It's connected to prakriti, to nature, and is almost inevitably tangled up with seeking pleasure, material gain, or worldly praise.
But why is the duty of another, even if it's done perfectly, sphanotatat, so dangerous that it's called bhayavaha, fraught with fear?
Because it corrupts your own unique spiritual nature. Even if that other path looks easier or more virtuous or gets you more praise from society, it will always lead you back into the cycle of birth and death, which is the ultimate source of all fear and pain.
Because it's performed with attachment, or it's just not the right tool for your specific spiritual work.
Exactly. Performing your own duty is like using the specific key that was designed to unlock the specific form of attachment that binds you. Trying to use someone else's key, no matter how shiny it looks, just won't work.
Okay, so Arjuna has now been told he must act, and he must perform his own duty. This immediately makes him shift his focus to the internal battle. If action is mandatory, then what is this invisible, compelling force inside that pushes a person away from their noble duty and toward sin, sometimes even against their own will?
He's acknowledging that very human feeling of being driven by something that seems almost outside of our control, a kind of psychological coercion. Arjuna vaka atakena priyutoya papakarati purosana piverkwashya balad ivanujita.
Kama ikrota e rajogo samudava mahashano mahabviditenam iya vaidyam.
Arjuna said. But by what is a man impelled to commit sin? As if by force, even against his will, Varshniya. The blessed Lord said, it is desire, it is wrath, born of the mode of passion, all-devouring and most sinful. Know this to be the enemy here.
This is the critical identification. The enemy is named. It is desire, kama, which is born from rajaguya, the mode of passion and activity. And this is the single root cause of all sin.
And it transforms. It does. When desire is not satisfied, it immediately becomes wrath, krodha. If the thing blocking your desire is too powerful to be angry at, that desire manifests as fear. But the root is always desire.
It's also called mahashano, all-devouring. Does this mean that worldly desire is fundamentally, by its very nature, insatiable?
Absolutely. The classic analogy is that desire is like a fire, and fulfilling it is like pouring clarified butter on it. The fuel only makes the flame burn hotter and demand more.
So you can never satisfy it.
Never. The commentary is very explicit about this. A spiritual seeker has to realize that worldly objects simply cannot satisfy the real need of the soul, which is for God realization. So satisfaction is impossible. But renunciation, though it's difficult, is possible. All spiritual warfare has to be focused on renouncing the desire itself, not trying to feed it into submission.
And to explain how this enemy works, Krishna uses three very famous analogies. They describe how desire covers up our natural wisdom, our discrimination.
Dumenavriate vani darshu malina, kayatol benavito garfas. Tatanedam vaitam, arfokuria tanyana metenana, janino nichavaya kama rupeya kauntia, dupure nalinaka. Indriyachmano budir asyatyahanam uchate teri mohayati ajanam avityadehinam.
As fire is covered by smoke, as a mirror by dust, and as an embryo by the placenta, so is this knowledge covered by that desire. O Arjuna, wisdom is enveloped by this constant enemy of the wise, in the form of desire which is insatiable like fire. The senses, the mind, and the intellect are said to be its seat. Veiling wisdom by these, it deludes the embodied soul.
Let's break down those three stages because they're a powerful warning about spiritual vigilance. The first, fire covered by smoke, is the nascent, subtle stage.
So at this stage, the fire of your discrimination is a little bit obscured, but you can still see it. You're aware of the desire, and you can still choose to be cautious.
Right, this is the moment to act, to put out the smoke. The second stage, the mirror covered by dust, is more serious. Here, your knowledge is veiled enough that you can't really decide clearly what you should or shouldn't do. The mind starts to waver. You start hankering after pleasure.
And the third stage, the embryo covered by the placenta. That sounds like total spiritual blindness.
It is. It's the final, fully destructive stage. At this point, the seeker completely forgets the real purpose of human life. The desire is so thick, so overwhelming, that the intellect is completely paralyzed. Krishna gives us these three stages so that we can learn to recognize the early signs, the subtle smoke, and slay the desire before it gets that strong.
And he names the battleground. The seats of desire are the senses, the mind, and the intellect. How does desire use this chain of command to trap us?
It's a sequential takeover. Desire first attracts the senses towards some worldly object. The senses then send that signal and stimulate the mind. The mind gets agitated and, in turn, influences the intellect. And the intellect then loses its power to discriminate.
And that's how wisdom gets veiled
Yeah.
and the soul is driven to ruin.
Yes. But we have to remember what the commentary points out. While desire appears to live in the senses, mind, and intellect, its deepest root is in the assumed ego, that false identification of the self with the body.
Which brings us to the ultimate question of self-mastery. If this enemy is so powerful and it operates through our very own senses, mind, and intellect, how can we possibly conquer it? We seem trapped.
Krishna provides the final answer by laying out the true spiritual power structure. Indriyach priyahu indriya paramana manasastu parabudir yobuti paratastu savya parabuti satavyatmanam atmanajahi shatru mahabaho kamarupadura sadem.
They say that the senses are superior to the body. The mind is superior to the senses. The intellect is superior to the mind, and the self is superior to the intellect. Thus, knowing the self to be greater than the intellect, restraining the self by the self, slay thou, O mighty armed Arjuna, the enemy in the form of desire, which is difficult to conquer.
And there is the definitive hierarchy. The senses are more powerful than the gross body, the mind is more powerful than the senses, the intellect is superior to the mind, and above them all, the true master, the sovereign, is the self.
So the whole conflict exists because our real desire, the soul's desire, is for God realization, for truth, consciousness, and bliss.
But through this delusion, this identification with the body, we confuse that highest desire with the fleeting sensory pleasures of the world.
So the method he prescribes, sastapitmanam atmana, restraining the self by the self. This is about using the higher discriminating self to assert its natural dominance over the lower deluded intellect. How do you do that in practice?
It's done by consciously accepting the real affinity, the real connection of the self to God, of which the self is a fragment. And at the same time, you actively and philosophically renounce the false affinity you feel for the body, which is just an insentient fragment of nature. This act of non-acceptance, this refusal to say, this body is me or these thoughts are mine, is what kills the ego. And since desire only exists in the context of that ego, when the ego perishes, desire is automatically slain.
As we move into Chapter 4, Krishna reveals an even deeper layer to this teaching on action. He talks about the nature of his own divine manifestation, his own birth, and uses it as the ultimate proof for selfless action.
Yes, Arjuna had questioned how Krishna, if he's eternal, could have taught this knowledge to the sun god in ancient times. The Lord's response is to draw this sharp dramatic contrast between his actions and the actions of an ordinary human being. Ajopi sanavyatma bhutanam ishwaropi sanpraki samatithaya sambhavami palmayaya.
Though I am unborn of imperishable nature, the Lord of all beings, yet governing my nature, I manifest myself through my yoga maya.
This highlights the absolute difference. A human being is born under the control of nature, of prakriti, to reap the fruits of their past karma. But the Lord is Ajopi Sanavyatma. He is birthless and imperishable. He manifests entirely of his own free will, governing his nature. He is never subordinate to it.
So he controls his own incarnation, he isn't controlled by it. What is this nature, this praki that he governs, and the yoga maya he uses?
This is not the ordinary material nature with the three modes. The Lord's prakriti is his pure, divine potency. It's the embodiment of truth, consciousness, and bliss. His sentient power. It's sometimes called yoga maya or divine grace.
So he uses this divine power to stage the drama of human life.
Yes, the Leela. He conceals his absolute lordship, performs actions perfectly, and in doing so demonstrates for all of us that the enlightened soul can work tirelessly in the world while remaining totally detached.
And this divine action has a specific cosmic mission.
Yade yadi hidharma shagleir bhavati farate. Parikreya saduma vineshaya kadukantan dharma sastapanarte vami yujiyu.
Whenever there is a decline of righteousness and rise of unrighteousness, O Arjuna, then I manifest myself. For the protection of the good, for the destruction of the wicked, and for the establishment of righteousness, I am born from age to age.
So what constitutes a decline of righteousness, a decline of dharma? The commentary says it's rooted in one thing: an increased attachment to the perishable, to the sensory world, to material pleasure.
And when that selfishness takes over, virtue decays and unrighteousness rises.
Exactly. The focus shifts from duty to desire, and that's when the Lord's threefold mission kicks in: protection, destruction, and establishment.
The destruction of the wicked, the Dutam, always sounds a bit harsh for an all-loving Lord. Is it a punishment?
It's described as an act of grace. Krishna is the disinterested friend of all beings. He protects the good, the satunam, who are naturally inclined to be selfless. When he destroys the wicked, it's an act of purification. He's ending their cycle of harmful actions and, it's said, often sends them directly to his own abode. It's a necessary cosmic reset.
And the final part of that mission, the establishment of righteousness. Dharmastapanarthaya.
This is defined very specifically in this context. It means the propagation of the selfless performance of actions. It means teaching karma yoga. His mission is to counter the tendency to act with selfish motives and prove that real virtue and stability are found in detached duty.
And what is the ultimate reward for someone who truly understands this, the divine nature of Krishna's actions?
This knowledge is the key to liberation. It surpasses other efforts because it aligns the seeker perfectly with the Lord's own detached nature. Janma karma kame divyo yoveti tatvata taktadeho punar gonmaneti mameti sorjuna.
He who thus knows in their true nature my divine birth and action, having abandoned the body, is not born again. He comes to me, O Arjuna.
That true knowledge, tattvata, means really getting it. Understanding that Krishna's manifestation is self-willed, that he is not controlled by nature, and that his actions are always for the welfare of the world, never for personal gain. When you truly understand his detachment, it gives you the wisdom and the power to replicate that detachment in your own life.
And that understanding is what allows you to escape the cycle of birth and death and achieve union with the Lord.
That is the ultimate promise.
So we began this deep dive with Arjuna's very relatable confusion. If knowledge is superior, why do I have to engage in this terrible action? And Krishna's answer, which unfolds across these chapters, is just so comprehensive.
It really is. He establishes that action is superior to faked inaction. You can't just stop, because the body and mind are ceaselessly driven by nature. To even try is hypocrisy.
The solution, then, isn't to renounce the work. It's to renounce the attachment and the selfish motive behind the work through the dedicated performance of your own specific duty, your svatdharma.
And we learned that this duty is part of a grand cosmic system, the eternal wheel of sacrifice, or yajna. It's a cosmic debt. To take resources from the world without rendering service back makes one, in the text's own words, verily a thief.
And we identified that ultimate enemy within, the constant enemy of the wise soul, insatiable desire, or kama. Born of passion, it hijacks our consciousness through its strongholds in the senses, the mind, and the intellect.
But there is a way to defeat it. The ultimate method is that restraint of the self by the self, asserting the reality of our spiritual nature over the material delusion of the ego.
And by using himself as the ultimate model, the unborn Lord who acts with enthusiasm purely for the welfare of the world. Krishna established that true perfection isn't about withdrawing from life, but about unattached engagement in it, for loka samgraha.
He proved that action is the necessary non-binding path to liberation, setting the perfect example for Arjuna and for every single one of us trying to navigate our duties in the world.
Let's close with a few final contemplations, things for you to think about, drawn directly from this incredibly profound commentary.
First, I would say, consider that fierce distinction between svadharma and paradharma. The text warns that the duty of another is fraught with fear, because it can corrupt your core nature, even if it looks easy or attractive. So ask yourself, where in your life might you be pursuing a path that looks good on the outside? Maybe it earns praise or money, but is really fueled by attachment and is pulling you away from the svadharma of your own core spiritual growth, which might be something much quieter, like service or just rigorous self-control.
Second, reflect on that idea of the thief and the remnant of sacrifice. A karma yogi uses all the resources they have, their body, their mind, their possessions, as if they belong to the world, to God, not as if they're yours. How can you practice this non-ownership in your daily life, in your career, in your family? How can you perform your duties without that binding feeling of mine or for me, and in doing so, transform your daily effort into an act of sacrifice?
And finally, revisit those three coverings of desire. Smoke on a fire, dust on a mirror, the placenta around an embryo. Desire grows stronger very quickly. It moves from that subtle smoke stage to completely veiling your wisdom. So how can you learn to detect the smoke? That initial gentle pull towards selfish pleasure or praise? How can you spot it early on, using your discrimination, before it gathers into dust and clouds your clarity, potentially pushing you to act against your own higher will? That early recognition of desire is, perhaps, the highest form of spiritual warfare.